Hello everyone, my name is Dani Fierro.
Yeah, I'm Santosh Gautam.
I'm Julius Caldwell.
I'm Luci Davis.
I'm Jacob Cheatham.
And this is our philosophy podcast where we talk about all the material we have learned throughout Philosophy 101. Since this is our final project and we're kind of summing up everything that we've been talking about here, I wanted to ask all of you, what is something particular in this course that resonated with you the most?
For me, deductive arguments was really easy to grasp, because it kind of says like if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true, even if it's not entirely like realistically true. Say if if I won the lottery, then I played the lottery. I didn't play the lottery, hence I didn't win. It's like really easy to follow, right?
Yeah.
So deductive argument was really easy to understand and also relate to for me.
Absolutely, and I think deductive arguments, learning that first in the course, was a good way to get us into philosophical reasoning and how philosophers think, which is an important part, and that lets us expand into all the other stuff, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I feel like deductive arguments kind of set me up to be prepared to what to expect, and then also how things might be stated, and then why something might come after that. And then I also feel like it also helped me throughout my life in general too, because I felt like I could see that, or like I could explain an argument or explain something by like giving the premises and then figure out the conclusion from there.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like I understood it, but I think it was just kind of weird to think about how, like, I can read an argument and it can make no sense, but as long as the conclusion matches the premise, it's true. Like, that's especially what would get me in, like, tests and that kind of stuff, because I would read something and just think, this makes no sense, it should be wrong, but because technically conclusion matches premise, it's right.
Oh, that's just an intro to how weird philosophy is.
Yeah,
Right.
But it was also, I felt like it was like an intro on like relating philosophy to like real world stuff too.
Yeah.
You know, because it was the first thing that we did. And like you said, with like the lottery and everything. So yeah.
Indeed. For example, we could talk about morality, which is something that we discussed later in the course. All these different moral theories rely on deductive or inductive arguments, and we come to all kinds of conclusions about those, even ones that might not entirely make sense to us.
Yeah, and I guess that follows along with the idea of like skepticism. So with the skeptic mindset, if the premises are uncertain, then the conclusion is uncertain. So that's like, you know, a different way of looking at deductive arguments.
Indeed.
As a counter.
And that ties pretty heavily into inductive arguments too. I mean, one thing we talked about in class was David Hume's sun argument, that because the sun rising every day, that's about as concrete of an inductive argument as we can get, you know? Like, we pretty much know the sun is going to rise every day, but what Hume posited is that we don't know that because that relies on the law of physics staying true, so even though it's obvious and we kind of have to believe that in order for things to make sense and for us to just live our lives.
Yeah.
We still need to believe that. Even the most certain things have a level of uncertainty if you look at them hard enough, and that ties into everything, whether we have free will, what morality really is, what knowledge even matters. It all ties together into this vast web knot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also on like the skeptic part, also Descartes, although he wasn't a skeptic, it kind of relates to deductive arguments because his whole thing was like, I think, therefore I am, and therefore I can, like, everything else is built off of that.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like, the premises would be that he can think, and therefore he can do anything else after that for the conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that also relates back to the deductive argument.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, like, with you saying the thing about Descartes not being a skepticist, I think, like, I don't quite understand how it is, because isn't his whole thing being that he is like, he doesn't believe anything is true until he finds one thing that is undoubtedly correct, which in this case wasn't it the I think.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
I don't understand how he wouldn't be considered a skepticist.
I think the thing with skepticism is that it's more so it's about doubt, but it's also more empirical in a sense. Like, it's a matter of observation, and Descartes isn't based around that as much. It's more so this foundationalist rationalism. Like, can you get to something concrete that is true? And then from there, he was able to expand out with all the other stuff with the dream argument.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Does that also kind of tie into indirect realism, since like our world isn't, well, we perceive things but not the world how it is, so would that kind of tie into, you would say?
It absolutely would, because with foundationalism, the one idea that Descartes could prove was that he could think, but if we consider indirect realism and we consider other ideas like bell hooks's idea of education as something physical and in turn life as something physical dependent on our bodies, then we encounter some counter arguments to Descartes' argument, because then we can say there is a reality that exists beyond our perception. Like, for all we know, outside of this room right here, it could just be a blank void of space now. It probably isn't, but and through indirect realism, we can realistically say there probably is something outside of that room beyond our perception. There's a physical reality to consider, although Descartes would argue that we can't really know what's outside that room. With other schools of philosophy, we can say, yeah, there is something outside of that room. We can't see it, but it's there.
Yeah.
Also, the Matrix too. We could be like,
Right.
nothing could be real,
Yeah.
and then that would also be skepticism too, wouldn't it? That like nothing's real, but we perceive it as real, or no?
Like, you don't really know what to
Yeah.
believe
Yeah,
in.
we don't really know if
Uh,
like you guys are real, or
Right. Or is
am I
that
real?
just a thought?
Indeed, absolutely. However, at a certain point, we kind of need to get out of that sphere and focus on the reality in front of us, because if we keep asking these questions, we're going to go insane.
But is indirect realism like the whole idea of it? It's like we could all be perceiving like
Things
like
differently.
the room, like just say the room around us differently, or even like on a situation based. Like if we turn these lights on right now, we're going to perceive the world a lot, or the room a lot differently than we are now.
We are, because there are some qualities like color that
Yeah.
aren't inherent to physical objects. They
Yeah.
can vary.
'Cause
So
Yeah, we could all see red differently. I mean, we're just told that's red, you know? Like,
Right.
that could be why we like other colors more.
That's
you know?
weird to think about.
Yeah.
no, my red is the correct red.
Yeah.
But see, if we all think that, then which is actually the correct red?
No.
Yeah. Or you could be colorblind and just see like, I don't know. So it's basically just like the world is external to our perception, and
Yeah.
because we all perceive it differently, and how do we know which perception is the correct one? So I feel like indirect realism is basically just saying that our perception of the world is separate from the actual world itself.
Indeed, although if you go away from that sphere and into, say, indigenous thought, they would be more focused on what knowledge is practical. So going back to the red example, we could postulate about what red is red and whether all of our reds are different, but how much does that really change our daily interaction with the world? Red
Yeah.
is still red to us, and what matters is how it applies to us, knowledge as something more practical and based on lived experience rather than independent thought.
Yeah.
And that's a view that I personally align more with. I think with philosophy, it's pretty easy to disconnect yourself from reality, at least with this sphere of philosophy. And I think philosophy can also be used as a more pragmatic tool to sort your way through the world and your own experiences to find what works for you, what's practical for you.
I think for me at least, it's just like at least going through this class and hearing about all the different like just polar opposites, like determinism, which is where I could be wrong on this, but this is where you don't believe you have any free will, like everything is determined, and then
That's hard to
the
determine.
or hard
That's what-
hard
Your past
determinism.
determines what happens to you next.
Like that idea just feels
Yeah.
so like insane to me to even think
Right.
about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to go back to indirect realism. I was thinking of the glass half full, half empty thing. Would it be a good example of indirect realism? Like, it depends on your perception of how you see that.
Do you care to elaborate?
So, if I had a glass right here where the water is not fully to the top of the bottle, right? One can describe this as
Like
almost
3/4
full
Mm-hmm.
or like 1/4
empty.
empty. So it depends on the perception of the person saying that, right? So would that be a good example of indirect realism or no?
I'm not sure if it's indirect realism exactly, more so I think we could tie this pretty well back to some of Bell Hooks' other ideas in her essay, where she was talking about how education is influenced by people's worldviews and
Yeah.
experiences, their own perceptions, and how that shapes philosophy and how that shapes their experiences. Glass half full, glass half empty is often used for like optimism versus pessimism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the way you perceive that in part is based on your own perceptions and worldview.
Yeah. I kind of agree with Bell Hooks' essay. Like, if I had to think, I was in a different the same philosophy class, but like the 10:15 a.m. one.
Mm-hmm.
I would see things
A lot
slightly different. Yeah,
more
slightly
clear,
different. It
yeah.
would be, or like if I was not in this group, but in a different group,
Mhm.
things would be different, right? So I kind of like agree with that. Your environment and the people beside you kind of dictate how you see things.
Indeed, and I think Bell Hooks ties pretty well into some of the other stuff that we were talking about with like Indigenous knowledge, where it's based on lived experience and like knowledge as something more practical and concrete. And I think this also ties into the Chasing Coral documentary that all of us watched.
Yeah.
How what we focus on and prioritize is very individually based and what we can perceive.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and I think like at least with the Chasing Coral documentary, a big thing was like I believe they brought this up in the documentary of like if this was like the forest and all of a sudden it just turned white, everyone would be like, what's going on?
Mhm.
But with the fact that it's coral, you can't really see it. It's not just like something that's there for us to like view. Like no one cares. Like no one realizes it's happening. And then like the one scene when they were all, I believe they were on a boat or a dock or something like that. They were like all partying, hanging out, and literally right below them, just coral is dying all around them.
Yeah.
Indeed, and that big montage at the end where they showed all the various coral reefs dying, that got to me. That got to me.
Yeah.
That was really sad. I think that also relates to first order and second order desires because, in my opinion, I feel like most people, it's out of sight, out of mind. And so we don't think about the effects that we could have on the coral or the earth that we don't see necessarily. And I feel like with the forest example, for example, we know the forest is bad. And I know some people, not everyone, we think about paper.
Yeah.
And so some people don't try to use paper because they're conscious of the effect that it could have on the environment. And also they find other resources. And I feel like that's the second order desire. We think about how it could impact, and then we try to redirect to something else. And I feel like if we thought about the coral like that in that sense, then we probably would be able to save the coral a little bit more. Also, I would like to note that jellyfish are immortal. I find that that was my favorite
Yeah.
fact.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, you bring up an excellent point, and ultimately think that's kind of what philosophy is when you really break it down. It's a matter of being able to take your experiences, what you can and can't know, and just trying to live your life in the way that's best for you, and ideally best for others too. That gets into moral theory, but I think just being able to live, being able to think more clearly about this life that all of us live, I think.
Thinking too.
Yeah.
I feel like the philosophy class as a whole, it's at least for like me, like I mean we all, I would say, has like no one's really changed the way they live since starting this class. I think what more so it does is it just makes you think, because it makes you think whether do I have free will to do something, or is this all determined for me? Like, how am I perceiving things versus how are you perceiving things? Like, realistically, none of us are changing what we're doing, but it definitely does make you think a little more about, like, I guess in a way, how you could be different from others.
Yeah. And I guess it's like, it gives you a lot of like introspection, I feel like, and like how like you live your day-to-day life and how it affects other things, especially with like the Chasing Coral documentary, because I mean, like you said, a lot of people don't like visually perceive what they're doing, but like getting the insight of our lifestyles and how it affects things that we don't directly see, it's pretty cool.
It relates back to the Zen argument, because the Zen argument was pretty much basically we should open our minds and perceive the world and understand the things around us, and basically be more aware of the things going on and go out and touch grass, as Dani would say. And so I think that also like relates back to what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
But I like kind of bring back to what I kind of was saying earlier. Another thing I liked, at least in our our group's conversation about the Zen article, is how everyone just kind of has their own way of doing that. Like how you said you like to go out on walks or like just be outside, whereas someone else said that they like to go on prayer walks specifically. Like just like reconnecting with the earth doesn't have to be one way. Everyone can do it in whatever way they feel most connected to nature.
Yeah.
Right. Meditation is not just like sitting down with your
like what you see in like movies.
It's more than that. Everyone has their own thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good note to end this episode of our philosophy podcast on. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope we get a good grade. Goodbye.
Bye.